Hello, my brothers and sisters, and welcome to another episode of Off the Beaten Path, the show that looks at paranormal events both historically and in modern-day times. As always, I'm your host, Rev.hagen, and as always, I'd like to welcome our listeners at SCRMradio.com. That's Scream. Radio.com. The only 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, 365-day-a-year live streaming horror radio channel with the philosophy that Halloween is not a holiday. It's a way of life. Oh, thank you very much. Now, for those of you watching and not just listening, you can tell there have been some change to the sets. Kind of temporary, kind of not. Today's episode actually has kind of a different format as well, and I'll get into that and give you the reason why. Today we're looking at black-eyed children and adults, a phenomenon that kind of started in the early 90s. The first known case of what we're going to be talking about was in the early 90s, and it's kind of been one story after another. What's different about today's broadcast is that we're going to be reading these stories to you instead of just, kind of telling you, a summary of what happened. I'm going to read these stories because what I found in my research on this was that they kind of developed into a pattern, one story after another. And I want to see if you feel the same way that I do. And we're going to find that out by me reading the stories and see if you picked up what I picked up. I do want to tell you the first time I heard of black-eyed children was in 2000. Even though I guess it really lit up the net in 98. Around 2000, my buddy Charlemagne, who started Where Angels Fear to Tread with me way back in the day at Fort Lewis, Washington, when we were both in the United States Army, we started doing paranormal investigations, and he told me this story about this black-eyed little girl that he had encountered with his friends in Oregon, in Sheridan, Oregon. So it's really intriguing. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to say anything about them until after I read you these stories. I'll give you the basic premise. The basic premise of black-eyed kids is that they'll knock on your door. You realize that they have black eyes, but they're trying to come in. They almost have a hypnotic effect on people when they encounter them, when they are interacting with them. And people find themselves letting them in before they even realize what's happening, and then getting absolutely paralyzed with fear, but feeling like they have to do what these kids say anyway. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? We'll get into that as well. So I'm going to read you some of these stories, and we'll take it from there, okay? So, let's get right into the stories, shall we? Story number 1, which apparently took place in 2016. This year, inside of a store at the mall, we noticed a man looking at us and our children. He then approached and told us how beautiful the kids were and asked how old they were. He had extremely dark eyes, jet black all the way around. He said he, his wife, and his young son had just moved from out of state and wanted to know our names, how old we were, etc. He noticed my necklace and asked if we went to a church in the area. He then left the store and never bought anything. I then got a friend request on Facebook, looked at his new profile, but didn't accept the friend request. We went back to the store 2 weeks later and saw him again, and he was talking to a new couple. When he noticed that I saw him, he stopped talking to the couple and left the store again without buying anything. I got a bad feeling about the whole thing, and all I know is that it scared us. He was in his mid-30s, bald, no facial hair, and around 5'7", and had those dark black eyes. The fact that he was so interested in our children terrified us. Story number 2. In the suburbs. He never thought he'd have anything like this happening. On Thanksgiving 2015, he was home alone watching TV and eating turkey. He heard a knock at the door. Thinking it was a neighbor, he opened the door without looking. There stood 2 kids, one in a baseball cap, blue jeans, and a jersey. The other was younger and shorter and was looking at the floor. He asked if they needed anything, and the baseball kid said, "Yes, we just need to come in and get our ball from the backyard." For some reason, he was terrified. Something about these kids wasn't right. He said something about the ball again, and it was then that he noticed that the eyes in the eyes of the younger kid were completely black. His face must have given it away, because when he looked back at the kid, his eyes filled with hate and seemed to get taller and more confident. It was then that he realized he wasn't in the presence of something human, but completely inhuman. They smirked and said, "Come on, man, just let us in," with a confident smile. They both seemed to grow to the same height. It was terrifying. He realized he was in terrible danger. He told them he'd be glad to get their ball, and then slammed the door and turned on all the lights. He looked out and didn't see the kids or anyone. Then a few minutes later, slow, soft knocks started from the front door. They continued with the knocking for a while. He went back to his chair in the living room, rocking back and forth and scared stiff. He fell asleep watching TV. When he woke up a few hours later, all the lights and the TV were off. He had the horrible realization that someone or something had been in his house. June 2015. I woke up around 3 a.m. with my chihuahua barking and looking around frantically. Both my dogs were very regular when it came to going to the bathroom, so this was a bit weird. My other dog was staring outside at the window, stock still. Then I heard a knock at the door. I walked to the door, still trying to get the leashes to walk the dogs. When I opened the door, I saw two children between the ages of 3 and 6 wearing some sort of gray tunic. The girl said, "We need to come in." I'd just woken up, so I said, "What?" She said again, "We need to come in." I asked, "Where are your parents?" Then the boy said, "We need to come in." It was then that I noticed how they looked. Their skin was porcelain. Their eyes were completely black. Then the boy's tone started to alert me. I started to feel very scared. The boy said more forcefully, "We need to come in now." It was then that I found I was opening the screen door to let them in. I looked at my dog, and she peed on the floor. I slightly snapped out of what I thought I was doing when the kid stepped closer to the door frame. Then all I could do was see in their eyes. I blacked out. The next thing I knew, my girlfriend was there and wanted to know why I was sleeping on the floor. I had never slept on the floor before. My head was killing me and I tasted metal in my mouth. It was time for my girlfriend to go to work. It was the only time I ever blacked out. I'm now just looking for answers. What had they done to me? Why? In this take, we find a woman who liked a good scare. Nothing crazy, but she dug a good scare. She went from reading and seeing horror movies and video clips to starting to dive into research on black-eyed kids. She found that they were always bringing a feeling of dread, and people who encountered them almost always got hypnotized. She was fascinated, but she's always been a fact-based person, and if you couldn't verify something, it simply didn't exist. And then she had an encounter of her own. Her story starts with her leaving her mom's house. Her father had passed away a year before, and she wanted to be there for her. She left her mom's suburban house at 11. The streets were well lit, and when she left her mom was waving goodbye and mouthed the words, "Be careful." She decided to take the back roads out to her farmhouse home in the country. Her father had left her the house. Her father had always warned her not to go out at night. That's when she was growing up, and to be aware of all the devils out there. He was a very suspicious man and interested in all things paranormal. He sounds like my kind of guy. As she got closer, she was caught with an eerie feeling. A storm had started rolling in, but it hadn't started to rain yet. As the thunder rolled, she started to get a little shaken up. Recalling some of the ghost stories she had read, she was really starting to get scared. Her radio wouldn't work, which was weird because there was always a radio tower very close. She then noticed she was nearly out of gas. As she looked for a gas station, she noted two figures walking down the road. She noticed that one of the figures had his thumb out. She started to pull over, then thought, what am I doing? Picking up two strangers felt like a bad idea. Then it started lightly raining. She looked in her rearview mirror and noticed that the thumb wasn't out anymore, and that they had picked up their pace. Which is weird because she shouldn't have been able to tell from the rear view if they had picked up their pace or not. She noticed a gas station and pulled over to get gas. The station was closed but had 24-hour gas service. The overhead lights started to go out and she got terrified. She looked across the street and there were the two figures standing there. She was shaking hard and not from the cold. The figures started to walk towards her. She jammed the gas gig back into the cradle and noticed they were closer. She realized that she felt compelled to talk to them. She got quickly into her car and noticed that they were teens. One approached the car and knocked on the window. The other one, a female, was behind him smiling. He asked if they could get a ride into town because they had missed the last bus. She was shaking with fear, and she said she couldn't as she fumbled for her keys. He knocked again and demanded for a ride. She looked up and noticed his eyes. They were completely black, deep and intriguing. She reached out to sheer terror. She started to start the car, and as she pulled out, the boy pounded on the car yelling for a ride. She made it home shaking terribly. When she got home and looked out the window, she saw them standing at the end of her driveway. Okay, in this story, the man already knew about black-eyed kids as well, okay? His neighborhood was in the bad side of town, the lower end of LA. Not a fun place. He lived in a place with 2 pools and a lot of Mexican children. Those are his words. He was a writer. So he was sitting at the computer with kids playing outside, women doing laundry. The kind of a nice place considering the area. People knock now and then and try to sell candy or subscriptions, or Jehovah's Witnesses, or people trying to sell bootleg DVDs. This particular evening was unusually quiet. He heard someone walking up to his apartment door. He usually hears people knock on his neighbor's door first, but not this time. He went to open the door, and as he went to open the door, he felt suddenly ice cold. He put his hands flat on the door as if he were checking for heat. He had a peephole, but for some reason he didn't use it. They knocked again. He asked who they were. A boy's voice said, "We need to come use your door." He said, "Yeah, that's not going to happen." He laughed when he was nervous, and they heard him laughing. They knocked again, but he didn't answer. After they walked away, he waited a few minutes, then opened the door wide. There was no one in sight. The courtyard and the apartment area was empty. This case starts again at night. She couldn't sleep. She decided to move into the front room and turn on the TV, and some old sitcoms droned on and on. Then she heard a knock at the front door. She wasn't scared. She lived in an upper-middle-class neighborhood and felt that she didn't have anything to fear. She looked at the people and saw nothing. She opened the door with a chain on it. Nothing. She went back to her couch when she heard the door knocking again. She went to the door and found 2 kids outside the door. The boy said, "Can we come in and use the phone? Can you help us? We're lost." He seemed so articulate. He was dressed so well. She just didn't notice the eyes. How could she not? There was a girl behind her in pigtails. Her hair was so long. She couldn't turn them away and invited them inside. They seemed surprised, like they couldn't believe she was letting them in. Her mind kept telling her that she should let them in. They were just kids that needed help. She ended up slamming the door and shaking wildly. Okay, this next one's from Greg Newkirk in a piece for Week in the Weird. Greg writes, or tells in his story, he tells the story of a Girl Scout running into black-eyed adults in the late 90s. In this story, the Girl Scout was going door to door, looking to sell some cookies, when an elderly couple ran up to her. The couple had the signature black eyes, and filled the Girl Scout with terror as they approached. The Girl Scout, so full of fear, wasn't able to move as the black-eyed adults came to her. They kneeled down to be at eye level with her, their smiles unnaturally wide. At that moment, a third woman appeared, grabbing the black-eyed adults by the arm and pulling them back into the house. Crazy, right? Here's another one. A little over a year ago, Dallas Adams had his own run-in with black-eyed adults at a gas station in Lucas, Texas. According to Dallas, when he went into a gas station to pay, there were other cars at the pumps, but when he came out, they were all gone. The only thing remaining was his car and a strange man standing by it. Dallas walked up to his car, passing the man who smelled horrible. As he passed the strange man, Dallas became afraid. He picked up his pace and got into his car. As he opened the door, Dallas looked at the strange man who was staring back at him. Dallas was motionless, caught in the gaze of the strange man who was slowly walking towards him. As he came closer, the strange man spoke. "I need a ride." Even from a distance, Dallas could smell his rancid breath. The strange man came closer and repeated himself. It was then that Dallas realizes the man's eyes are totally black. He asked the strange man where he was headed. "Just give me a ride," the strange man replied. The two stared at each other. Dallas felt as if he were being sucked into the strange man's lifeless black eyes. He couldn't move, he couldn't talk, he couldn't breathe. Dallas blinked, breaking the connection. He quickly got into his car and sped off. Crazy, right? Now, this last one we're going to read is kind of the one that kicked the whole thing off, all right? I'm just going to read it, and then, like I said, we'll go ahead and talk about this phenomenon in general, and what if you're gleaming the same thing that I gleaned from these stories. Okay, here we go. Brian Bethel sat in his car and filled out a check by the light of the movie theater marquee above. Camelot Communications, Bethel's internet provider, needed to be paid, and Bethel wanted to get it to them before they shut off his access to the outside world. Maybe he was deep in thought about Mortal Kombat, the movie the theater's marquee was so proudly announcing to the good people of Abilene. Or perhaps Bethel was looking for the bill for Camelot to make sure he paid the right amount. Whatever it was that had his attention, it wasn't the two young boys wearing hoodies standing at the driver's side window. If they had never knocked, Bethel likely would never have known they had come so close to him. But they did knock, and Bethel did see them. Brian Bethel, not thinking, or maybe thinking too much, cracked the window. As he did, a blanket of dread came over him. The boys removed their hoods, showing their faces. One of them, who Bethel would come to call the spokesman, had dark curly hair and olive skin. He asked Bethel for a ride home. The two kids had planned to see Mortal Kombat, but they had left their money at home and they needed to move fast if they wanted to get back before the trailers ended. The other boy, a redhead freckled whose skin had possibly never been touched by the sun, he was so pale, stood quietly and unmoving. Bethel checked the time. It was late. The last show of Mortal Kombat had already started. He told this to the spokesman. "It won't take long," the spokesman replied. Bethel told the boy that by the time they got to his house and back, the movie would be almost over. "We're just two kids," the spokesman pointed out. The dread that Bethel felt before was getting stronger. "We don't have a gun or anything." Without him realizing it, Bethel's hand had moved to lock his door, and though he was filled with terror, he stopped himself from completing the action. Bethel looked down at his hand and just how close to the lock it was. When he looked back up, the world he knew was changed forever. The two boys stared back at Bethel with eyes as black as coal. No pupils, no iris, no sclera, just black. The blackness of death. Bethel spoke fast, making up a series of nonsense about why he couldn't give the boys a ride. He put the car in reverse and rolled the window back up. The spokesman banged on the window and screamed, "We can't come in unless you tell us it's okay. Let us in. Bethel pulled out of his spot and drove as fast as he could. He looked back as he turned the corner. The two boys were gone. This was the first time anyone ever saw the black-eyed children. So what did you think? What's really interesting to me is when I started this, right? When I started to look into this case more deeply on the internet, I was struck by how much these are like creepypastas, how they're written that way. Now, these are from different sources all over the net, which I'll list down below. I'll give everybody credit for this. None of this are my words. These are other people's words about their black-eyed kids' experience or reporters' take on the people they interviewed, black-eyed children's and adults' experiences. I've never had an experience with black-eyed kids, and if I'm being honest, I don't know any investigator that has. Please, if you have, and you're a paranormal investigator or not, or if you've got a black-eyed kid story, either leave me a note, leave the story, or leave the story itself down below, or shoot me an email. My email will be in the notes below on this as well. It, to me, was a very new phenomenon. But like I said, researching this thing, and one story after another was so much more like a creepypasta. Like, he opened the door, and suddenly there it was, right? I mean, it's very dramatic. They're written very dramatically, which I really believe is going to throw people off on whether this is a true story or not. Now, a couple of the articles that I read had said that the black-eyed children and adult phenomenon period started in the 90s, in the early 90s. And I don't know if that's entirely true. We've had forever stories of vampires that have permission to be let in, much like the children in these stories. You have to let us you have to let us in. We can't just come in, right? They're always asking permission to come in. And the one woman that was going to give them permission changed her mind and slammed the door at the last minute, but the children were shocked that she actually said, yeah, I'll let you in. I heard of another story, and I don't know if it's true or not, because I wasn't able to verify it on any level, that there was a woman that let these children in out of, like, oh my gosh, poor kids, come on in, out of nothing but clear and pure intentions, and has been plagued by them ever since, much like UFOs, stories of abductions, and some of the parallels, not just of vampires, but of men in black, are kind of startling. The color of their skin. In one story, if you remember, one was porcelain, which is a very common with men in black stories where people have seen a UFO or a strange experience, and these strange men in black come with very pale skin. Some of them with Asian eyes, with the slanted eyes, and speaking almost mechanically. Is the big difference, but there a lot of the description have their eyes completely black, and again the only story that we have where she's let them in, she remembers doing this and dealing with these children for years afterwards, and almost feeling powerless not to, much like an abduction case. The other story where one of the kids had olive skin, the children had olive skin, was very common, especially the men in black that appeared in the Mount Pleasant's case in the Mothman. Men in black were continually approaching Mary, the reporter there. I can't remember her last name offhand. Mentioning the reporter there. I'm sorry if you're hearing beeping in the background. I don't have a soundproof room, and apparently a big truck is backing up close to my house, which is always a joy, let me tell you. So, let me know what you think. This story for me, in folklore, there's always been stories of travelers trying to get into somebody's house and them getting a bad feeling about it, being compelled to open the door but getting a bad feeling of it. In Western Europe, there's huge folklore for that, and even in the Middle East, stories of jinn posing as travelers, knocking on the door, trying to get access in. I've never heard of a supernatural being that was benevolent, that was a nice guy doing this. It usually means bad news. And I to let you know a little bit more about myself, I'm going to digress here for a second, but I've also, in another life, been an Aikido instructor, right? Been an Aikidoist for years and ran a juniors program for New School Aikido when it was in San Jose with my partner, Gabriel Hatcher. We always used to tell people, go with your gut. If nothing else, if these classes do nothing else, they should bring out awareness, right? And if you're walking down a street and you get a weird feeling about walking down the street, don't walk down that street. If you're coming up on a couple of guys and you get a weird feeling like, man, I get a weird vibe off these guys, cross the street. We even went as far to say, is if you're driving home and you get a weird feeling on the drive, go the other way. Take another route home. The worst thing that'll happen is you've changed your route home. You'll never know if you were going to get into an accident or not. But hopefully you'll make it home safely. Always listen to your gut. Where that gets tricky is in paranormal investigations, because if you go into a haunted house, or if you go into a house where there's any kind of paranormal activity going on at all, or in the woods, or in a graveyard, wherever you're at doing an investigation, you're going to get those feelings. And for us as investigators, we go, yeah, and charge forward, right? As an investigator, you're the one that goes for that creepy noise in the other room, camera and recorder blazing, right? You're trying to get proof of it. You're trying to figure out what's going on in this house, these woods, whatever the case may be, especially if it's a house, right? You want to find out what's going on to save these people some heartache. So it is a little different when you're dealing with that kind of deal, and you can tell. I'm a veteran as well, but you can ask any combat soldier. That tickle that you get in your feeling that something's coming down. You should probably listen to that. That's probably a good idea. That's pretty much it for this edition of Where Angels Fear to Tread. I hope you dug the kind of creepy pasta gig that we were kind of forced into when it came to these stories. Again, if you've got a story of a black-eyed kid, please either leave it in the comments below, email it to me, or email it to me, I should say, and I'll discuss it on air. I'll put it on air. I'll follow up this episode with it. Again, if you've got a case you want me to talk about, a historical event that you think was skipping cool and you want me to talk about it, please mention it in the comment below or email it to me. My email, just so you know, is rev.hagen@gmail.com. That's rev.hagen@gmail.com. Let me know what you think of the black background. It was just an easier way to go. We're trying different events. Again, if you're listening from SCRMradio.com, that's Scream. Radio.com. We're always glad to have you. I love doing these things for you. Please like the video that you just saw. Comment on the video. Even if you say, God, you are so full of crap, Rev. I have no idea what you're talking about anymore. You've gone off the deep end, and frankly, you need psychological help. Put it in the comments below. Comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And let me ask one more favor, you guys out there. Please spread the word about my little show here, okay? We are on SCRMradio, which is getting bigger by the day. So grateful for Tracy and everybody involved in that program out there, or in the radio, SCRMradio. I am going to be doing some horror cons and some interviews in October that I'm really excited about. And subscribe to the channel, and share if you could. And once again, as always, my brothers and sisters, from Off the Beaten Path and from Where Angels Fear to Tread, the paranormal group, my brothers and sisters, keep your heads up out there. Have a great day.